to another exciting episode of A Legion on Zoom.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Legion on Zoom. As always on Forever, this is Ches.
And this is Miguel.
This is Rod. What's up?
Yo, and we are so excited to have with us today one of the most prolific comic book writers out there. Like, if you read Marvel, you most likely read some of his work, because he's written basically great runs on Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Punisher, Max, Wolverine and the X-Men. He recently wrapped up an epic 7-year run on Thor, and now he's been writing Avengers for nearly 50 issues and counting. And that's not even mentioning, right, like all the creator-owned stuff like Scalp, Southern Bastards, and the Goddamned. We are very, very lucky to have Jason Aaron himself on the show today.
Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir. Woo! We can have a whole episode just on reading your credits. We have to stop eventually.
That's awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
I mean, thank you for gracing us with your genius presence. We highly appreciate the time.
Yeah, and I will say that I think this would be maybe the one of the few good things that came out of the pandemic, that we can do the Zoom, things a little bit more comfortably like that. So how have you been, Jason? How has hopefully the pandemic hasn't affected you? Obviously, you're still writing awesome stuff. So how have you been?
I think like most everybody else, it's been a challenging year and a half now. I don't know, it seems like a decade. My sense of time is completely shot. Like sometimes I think, did that happen 2 months ago? Did that happen 5 years ago? I got no idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've been, in a weird hole for a year and a half now. But thankfully I've been able to, still do my job for that period. And I'm fortunate that I'm super, super excited about everything I'm working on right now, and really excited about, stuff to come, some of which we can talk about, some of which, will still remain secret for a bit longer. But yeah, so I'm doing, all things considered of how weird and crazy the world is, I'm doing all right. How about you guys?
To me, it kind of sounded like when you discussed your state of mind regarding the time lapse, how Thor described how he remembers things because he's immortal. That is like things are like in a haze. Like he can't remember his time in 800 Scandinavia. So it's like it's all one blur. We're all like gods now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I maybe encountered my future self at some point in the past year and a half too.
And what kind of drugs are you doing exactly?
All of them at this
I think it's just isolation is the drug that I've been on.
Have
you been able to write more, or like how has it affected the output? You have a very high output as a writer.
Definitely. I mean, I think I'm probably not alone in this. I think probably other creators have been the same, that it was hard for a while. There was a point where you feel like, oh, okay, we're all gonna be stuck home for a while. Man, I'm gonna read so many comic books. I'm gonna watch so many movies. I'm gonna get so much work done. And then it didn't work out quite like that. I think there's a period is just kind of hard, right? It's just hard to like, why am I writing about Captain America? When the world is falling apart. Like, it was hard to be invested in the Marvel universe when you were so caught up in our own universe. But I kind of got past that point, and since then, certainly this year, like since January of this year, I've been really busy, and for the most part been forging ahead and getting a lot of work done. It's hard for a while. I think probably everybody was the same way.
No, and I totally get what you're saying, but I will say, on behalf of the Legion on Zoom, and I'm sure everybody out there, we are grateful and thankful that we were still getting comic books, and awesome comic books like by you, because that really provided a sweet deal of escape that we need. No, because of course there's all this horrible stuff happening. We're so locked in, and so just being able to get that week where the new Avengers book came out and we're seeing some crazy things happening, it's like, all right, it provides a good. So thank you for giving us a break from everything that's been going on with that.
Sure. Well, thanks. I mean, I feel the same way. I was super excited when I was able to go back to the comic book store for the first time. But, really for me, like as much as I am still a fan and love going and buying my comics and reading, the probably even bigger part of the joy for me is just doing the stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
writing comics is still a source of joy. It's like kind of when I can't do it, it's like I've forgotten how to breathe or my heart's not beating right. It's like physically I'm screwed up. I'm not functioning correctly. So to me, it's, makes me happy just to write the stuff, even if, it's like gravy that I get to send it off and it gets drawn by amazing artists and it becomes a thing I can go to my local shop and buy. People read it and respond to it. That's all great. But for me, it's like the actual writing part of it is what makes me happiest, really. So I'm just happy to be able to do that.
And actually, with that, we would love to know, what is a day in the life for Jason Aaron like? Like how do you do it? Like how do you work? Like what's your secret?
I don't know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, we're just gonna ask also to add to when we go. Just ask, would you be able to give us like a difference pre and post the pandemic? What a day would be like in the life of Jason Aaron in the process?
I mean,
Intra,
I think
not post.
those of us who've been freelancers, for a while, like we had been training for a pandemic for a long time, right? Without knowing it. Like my work like didn't change all that much, right? Like I already worked from home most days. I wouldn't have to put on pants if I didn't want to.
Nice.
Like I'd only leave the house every once in a while to go to the grocery store or go for a walk in the park. So it's kind of been the same, I just didn't go out to restaurants or bars like I would like to for a while. But work-wise, it's kind of been the same. My comic career is pretty much exactly the same age as my son. He just turned 16, so
wow.
My comic career is old enough to drive at this point. Like my career as a full-time professional comic book writer. I quit my last day job when he was born. So, so I've been working from home for a while. And I think the fact that I did start out, okay, I'm writing comics and I'm staying home and taking care of a kid. It kind of helped me develop some sort of regular schedule. I mean, I work with some people who are single, who don't have kids, who keep like, rock star heroin addict hours, right? Where it's still, you never know if they're waking up or going to sleep or what. Like it's
or both.
Absolutely right. They probably don't know. So I've never really done that. I mean, I'm definitely not a morning person. I'd much rather stay up late, and I feel like my brain works better at night, but I still try to keep some kind of relatively normal schedule. But again, when you work from home, work's always right there. And for me, like I said, I enjoy it, right? Like I like to do it. So you end up, working a lot more than just a straight 9 to 5.
So what was your day job before writing comics?
Well, is this a family show? Like how much do you want to
know?
Okay.
Say whatever you
Do
want.
not worry.
Yeah,
You're a hitman.
No. Yeah.
We can pause the recording at any moment if you want. We'll delete things.
I work the vanilla answer is I worked in a warehouse.
And what's the chocolate answer?
It was a warehouse of, we'll say, adult novelty items.
Yes, let's go. That's what I'm talking about. The American dream.
It's not. It was not. It was really very much not.
I mean, your transition was the American dream,
Right.
not working at.
Oh yes,
Yeah, there was nothing particularly glamorous about it. I mean, warehouse job. You sort of know right there. It just happens to be a warehouse full of sex toys and pornography.
Yeah.
But I think to what Ches is saying about like at least the American dream in terms of like like
the
from
transition,
warehouse
your growth
to epic Marvel writer, exclusive Marvel, and then I thinking too about like because I read some of your origin story, and heard in other interviews that You got your first big break from winning a talent contest for Marvel. Like that's insane. That's awesome.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was this weird thing, that kind of fell out of the blue. Marvel has kind of never done another thing like that. It sort of happened at the time at San Diego Comic-Con and Wizard World Chicago. So I would kind of go back around then. That was in 2000, 2001. I was going to Wizard World Chicago pretty much every year back then. That was kind of the main convention I'd go to. So that year you wrote up a synopsis of a Wolverine story and dropped it in a box at the Marvel booth. And that's what I did.
Insane.
And months later, I got a call from somebody at Marvel about doing a story. So that was my first published, really the first comic script I ever wrote. It was a 10-page story, I think. For the first time, kind of got my foot in the door and gave me the confidence to feel like, hey, maybe I'm good enough to start trying to take a crack at this, because it's what I'd always wanted to do. I didn't know much. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't, went to school and got an English degree. I knew wanted to write, but I had no idea how do I get a job where that pays me, let alone how do I get a job doing comics. And, back then, back in the long ago, you kind of had to live in New York City to break into comics. I was breaking in because, before the days were, now literally I work with people who live all over the world. Like the creative team of one book, you could have, 4 or 5 countries represented. So now it doesn't matter where you live, but back then it still kind of did. So I had no idea how to go about doing that. And so I didn't know much, didn't know how to, again, I have no other, relevant job skills. But
except being a genius.
I don't know if that would, again, send me right back to Porn Warehouse. If I'd be the most genius guy at the Porn Warehouse.
But getting it done.
Right, absolutely.
Exactly.
But anyway, I didn't know much, but I kind of figured out quickly, like I believe then, I still believe this now, the hard part is being good, right? Like being a good enough writer to warrant somebody's attention in terms of breaking in, to warrant readers' attention, warrant their money, right? Like I always felt like that's hard, right? Like it's easy to sit back and look at comics you don't like and say, well, that guy sucks. I can be better than that. Yeah, but can you really? Can you honestly? Are you honestly good enough that if you as a reader walked in and saw a book you wrote, for $5, would you pay that money to read it? So I always thought that's the hard part. I just got to work on being good enough. If I can get to that point, man, people break in all the time, right? Like you can always figure out, how do I meet an editor? How do I get this pitch or get whatever and get my work in front of somebody? That part you can figure out, right? Like that has its own challenges.
Right.
But I always thought, man, if I just got to where I'm good enough, right, I can figure out the other part. So I just focused on that for the longest time and wrote a bunch of horrible stuff that I hope nobody ever reads.
It's out there. It's out there.
No, it's locked up in my storage space.
Okay, good job.
I'll be buried with it. But
Fair enough.
I did. That's what I focused on for the longest time. And it was really once I won that talent search contest, I thought, okay, like maybe now I'm good enough that I won this thing. Maybe I'm good enough, like I could start to take a crack at this. And it still took me another 5 years of writing and pitching and hustling before I had more work coming out. But I'm convinced, that's the thing, is be hardest on yourself in terms of being good enough, not just like, okay, I already know I'm good enough. I'm better than all these other people. I just gotta, how do I get an agent? How do I get an editor? How do I do this? Like, just be good enough first, and the other stuff will take care of itself.
Definitely. You got to put in the work. You got to put in the hustle from before and just keep at it and not give up. And it sounds like you were describing like for when you submitted your script for Wolverine back then, that was like the first time you submitted a script, but it sounded you've been working, before, trying to, writing and just creating stuff that no one will ever see, as you're saying. And how did you know that you wanted to write for comics?
Well, I started reading comics when I was little. Like that's kind of how I learned to read, was from comics. So I've always, pretty much my whole life, I've been reading comics, and pretty quickly, like knew I wanted to write. I think that came from having good teachers, in elementary and middle school, who encouraged me to write, and told me, hey, you're good at this. You should do more of this. And again, it made me happy. I think like a lot of creative people, I am non-functioning in some ways, socially or in general, life in general, right? Like a lot of creative people.
Something's off somewhere.
Right. We don't necessarily fit in different ways. And for me, I think for most of my life, just have been unable to communicate with words that come from my face, right? Like I could, most especially as a kid, I was just quiet. I didn't talk. I certainly couldn't tell you how I felt about, so I couldn't, like an emotion to travel from my heart through whatever process to come out my mouth was just, those connections weren't firing, like they didn't exist. I couldn't do that. But I could put anything into words on paper, like the craziest shit I could think of, and give it to somebody to read. Things I could never communicate or say out loud. I could write them down. So, crazy shit that would have gotten me these days would, get me put on like some kind of watch list at elementary school of like,
observed.
This kid maybe needs to be homeschooled. Like we don't trust him around the other children. But again, I think I was able to do that. It became like this fundamental part of how I function, right? Like, I think I've gotten better at the words coming out of my face part of it, but it's still it is not natural to me. It's still something I have to work at.
But then all the more reason, thank you for joining us and being like literally an hour talking from your mouth.
I don't want to make it seem like it's a burden to speak to people. Again, I've also been, like you guys, I've been stuck home for a year and a half, so I haven't hardly spoken to anybody. So it's nice just to talk to humans.
And we definitely appreciate it. And if it wasn't for us having to be locked up for months, a year and a half ago, us three wouldn't be here with this endeavor right now talking to you. So in one weird way, it's all connected. Right.
Yeah, there we go. Well, you got to look at the bright side of some of the things we've gotten from the last year and a half, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Because this for us, the podcast came out of that, because we hang out, we all kind of live close to each other, but then right at the pandemic, we're like, whoa, we want to still talk comics and hang out. We're like, why don't we just record it and start a podcast? And then it forced us to do it like weekly, and then that was kind of like our origin to thankfully be able to just hang out, right? We're just really doing it to hang out, and then it became a little bit more, hopefully, so it's
great. And yet somehow we ended up talking to one of the greatest writers in modern day comic books. So here we are.
I have a follow-up question. So, you started reading comics as a child. Did any specific writers resonate with you? Like, oh, that guy, I kind of want to emulate that guy's career or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. I remember Marv Wolfman was like the first comic book writer who I knew by name. Right. And I think Wolfman and Perez were like the first team. So I was a huge New Teen Titans fan.
Nice.
George Perez was the first artist who, as a kid, I could recognize his work. Right. Like I'd see a Avengers cover or whatever and that's that guy I like. That's that guy who draws Titans. And Marv Wolfman was the first writer who I'd started to look for other things he had written. And then, Titans kind of led me into Crisis. And then Crisis, was filled with all these characters I'd never seen or heard of. So that opened the doors to other stuff. So really those two guys were in a large way responsible for me becoming such a big comic book fan. And then, going forward, I remember the first time I read Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. That was the first book I ever read by him. I think I read that before Animal Man. And Doom Patrol just blew my mind. I was like, what the hell is this? Like, I didn't know you could do stuff like this in a superhero book. So, and Grant's somebody that I've remained a huge fan of consistently, from that moment until now. And I'd look at I've always kind of looked at his career with something to sort of chase after, and that I love that Grant has done such an incredible diverse array of different kinds of books, right? Like different genres, different everything. Like it's hard to point at like what's like the Grant Morrison book, right? I think if you ask 5 Grant Morrison fans, you get 5 very different, equally valid answers. And some would, somebody might say Justice League, right? JLA. Somebody might say a work for hire superhero book. Other people would name one of his many creator-owned books. So he brought such inventiveness and passion to each one of those, right? Like you could tell he wasn't a guy who was just doing superheroes because that was where the jobs were at. Like he did it because he loved it, and then he'd go off and do his own crazy creator-owned stuff. So I think he's the guy I still look to as sort of on my Mount Rushmore. When my son was born, one of the names I had on my list was Grant.
Oh wow. Which would have been pretty epic.
Yes.
which in itself would have been pretty epic. Now, considering such an expansive catalog of work that you have, is there any particular arc that's extremely close to your heart, you would say? What is like the one arc that you've done that's come out of you that is the most you, I guess you would say?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, on the one hand, I would say, everything you do, you try to bring something of yourself, and otherwise, you're just kind of going through the motions. But certainly there are stories here and there where, I'm able to hit that mark better than others, maybe. I mean, yeah. Scalped in general feels like that, and that, it's not, on the surface, it's not a book that's about me in any way, right? But it's so much of my life is kind of still tied up in that book and the making of it, and in different stories here and there throughout it. So that one holds a very special place. In terms of like superhero stuff, probably the different parts of the Thor run. I think that the first God of Thunder arc, the God Butcher, God Bomb story.
Oh my God, it was amazing. Thank you for that. By the way, thank you for that.
But there's a lot of me in there, and my thoughts on God and religion, in both pessimistic and optimistic ways. I think that it's all tied up in what that story is about. And then sorry, go ahead.
No, okay. We're thinking we have a question about that. Actually, we were saving it for later on the show, but actually, now that you brought it up, I think we would love to get your thoughts on it.
It ties in perfectly because I don't know what this says about me as a person, but let's not even dig into that part. But when I was reading the God Bomb arc, it almost felt like a release, almost cathartic to read Gore's dialogue. So it's almost like, and it wasn't that I felt that way verbatim, but it's almost like he shared a lot of sentiments that I think in some way almost everyone wants to express when things go wrong. I mean, few people have it go wrong to his level, but yeah, but to some extent or another, I feel like we all almost kind of feel that way. Like, how much of Gore talking was you talking?
Yeah, certainly quite a bit. Probably especially there's a scene, I don't remember what issue, but there's a scene with like Gore's son, where I think Gore's son is kind of talking, it's sort of given John Lennon Imagine song, right? Like in
Yeah.
dialogue saying, man, wouldn't it be better if like none of you gods existed? Like, look at how terrible you all are. And we would all be so much better off if we weren't squabbling over, which one of us believes in the right God. Certainly, certainly that's very much how I feel most every day. And I think a lot of gore, like the power of it is that you read his origin story and you understand like why he's so angry, right? Like you said, his life has been horrible, and people all around him have always been praying to these gods and saying, we just have to trust in them, that they'll take care of us. And then terrible things happen to him, and he says there are no gods, right? Like why would we believe that there's anything up there? Like nobody's looking out for us, nobody's helping us. And then he finds out that, oh shit, there are gods, and they've just been fighting each other this whole time while he and his people have been down there suffering and dying. And so I think you understand his rage in that moment, right? Like why he picks up this weapon and kills that first god. And then I think like a lot of the most interesting villains, he starts out with emotions and thoughts that you can relate to and understand, and then sort of takes it to
that place where like, whoa, buddy.
Like I wouldn't take it that far exactly myself. But actually now with that comment, I think that's great, because I've seen like with that theme right now, I've been loving the Goddamned. Like I'm almost wrapped up right now with the last volume, and I feel there's themes of that in the Goddamn, but like as you said, right, Gore is the villain, but now we're actually seeing the protagonists, in Cain in the first volume, and then Jael primarily in the second volume, that have that kind of, and rightfully so, of like, literally several times, fuck you, God, save your prayers,
right. The literal
almost,
words.
and a little bit bleak, I feel, but like, in a very realistic way, in a way that like I believe it, like that world they're living in is like it's more biblical, right? It's like what we would imagine, and I feel a little bit of gore in there. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I think all that just kind of comes from the same place for me, as somebody who grew up in the South in a small town and was raised in the church, in the Baptist church, and grew up with the stories of the Bible. And then, kind of in 1920 or so, the faith part of the equation for me started to kind of fall apart piece by piece, until ultimately I realized, like, I don't really think I believe any of this anymore. So I've been an atheist, at this point for, I guess, most of my life. But have remained fascinated by the stories of religion, the stories of Christianity and the Bible. So all that kind of feeds into the Goddamned. That was really an idea I had when I first pitched Scalp to Vertigo.
Oh wow!
Another thing I pitched them was what would basically become the Goddamned. So yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been fascinated by that, that pre-flood period, that the idea of the pre-flood world where it's like humanity is so pretty new and fresh, but things have already gone so completely off the rails that God's like, well, screw this, we just kill everybody and let's try it again, start over,
reset,
right? and the part of that is that you're talking about a world where the presence of God is real, right? Like the people who live in that world are not looking to the sky like Gore was and wondering, like, is there a God up there? Right. They know it, because sometimes he walks around and they hear voices from burning bushes, and it is a world where there's no doubt about the fact that oh yeah, there's a God up there and he made us, he made all this. Yet they still reject him, but right to his face, right? Like that's not me embellishing, like that's what that world was, right? Like that's what the Bible says it was,
as far as we know.
Right. When I say as it was, I mean clearly of course I don't believe that part, but for the sake of this story, I do. That's the world that it's set in. So I've always been fascinated by that world. And to me, it always seemed like a great setting to basically do, dark crime stories, which is what I feel like The Goddamned is both. It's a crime story, and Gara and I doing a follow-up to Scalp in some sense. It is also about my love of caveman comics.
Yes.
I'd love the days when we would get, Devil Dinosaur and Joe Kubert's Tor and all these kind of books about cave people running around with dinosaurs. I loved those comics. So I kind of wanted to do that mixed up with the crime stuff. And then, it's also sort of an end of the world story. It's like the very first end of the world story. So that's really the genesis of, no pun intended, of The Goddamned.
Pun very intended.
Right.
Very intended.
And if you like you said, the first arc focuses on Cain as the man who invented murder,
Right.
and a very different sort of portrayal of Noah. And then the second arc is a completely different place within that same world, different group of characters going through a very different sort of trial. These young girls who are part of this sort of secluded nunnery up in the hills, who realize kind of what the dark secret of the place is and want to get the hell away from it. And then by the time you get to the end of that story, you see there's it connects back to the first one. So really the whole idea of The Goddamned is just to do different stories within that world, that I think will still build towards something. But within that, we could kind of do whatever, right? As we, the rains start to fall more and more, we build towards what happens then.
And is there anything you can tell us about the next stage of The Goddamned, since you a few months ago wrapped up the last arc?
Yeah, nothing I'm ready to talk about just yet. Certainly I know what that is. Again, it took us
Worth a shot.
Took us quite a while to get that second one done. I hope if you look at those pages, you can see why, and that Gara really did, I think, some of the best work he's ever done in his long career. Those the pages that the Virgin Brides are just really, really breathtaking to me. So he's working on something else right now. I've got other stuff I'm working on. We're definitely coming back to that. Again, the idea is kind of always, The Goddamned is not just sort of one story we're telling chapter after chapter. It's a lot of different stories that will fit together. So it's something we could keep doing a long, long time, or something we can wrap up shorter. We'll just sort of see. It's this next year for me will be kind of a pivotal one, when I'm still trying to line up the different pieces of in terms of my Marvel stuff and my creator-owned stuff. Still trying to fit those different pieces together, and part of that will be kind of figuring out where The Goddamned slots in. It won't be the next creator-owned book you see from me, but believe me, it is coming back.
And we definitely can't wait to have it back. Now, one quick question. So since you consider yourself an atheist, do you feel that basically gives you a certain amount of fearlessness in how you tackle your subject matter that another writer, even if they're not a religious person, they wouldn't have? Because I have a theory that even if someone is not religious, they would feel this really like innate fear inside of tackling some of the issues you've tackled, or just even writing some of the dialogue you've written. Like they would feel bad about it in some weird way. Do you feel that you have a certain amount of freedom?
Maybe you mean in just that I'm not worried about going to hell?
Exactly. Basically, yeah.
Sure,
Which even though like a lot of people say that they're not religious, it's a fear they have.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I suppose you're right. I haven't thought of it that way. I a fiction writing class I took in college. I went to UAB in Birmingham, Alabama, and I had a couple of really good fiction classes. I had a professor, Dr. Wharton, who I think the first night in class, he told you one of the pieces of advice he gave us was to write like your parents are dead, right? To
Nice.
write to like, not that you wish your parents were dead.
No, of
but
course not.
that you put aside that fear of like, oh, what, oh my God, what will my mom say if she reads this? Like you gotta,
That's amazing.
you gotta put that aside, and you can't be fettered in that way, right? Like you gotta write like everybody's going to be personally offended by this is already dead, and I'm going to write whatever story I want to write. So I think that's kind of the same thing. If you can't write out of fear in that way, right? Like you,
Yeah.
So I didn't, I wrote, again, some crazy shit in that college class, same way I did when I was a kid.
You should publish all of that. All of it.
No, and I get what you're saying. I love it because even reading the goddamn, I'm loving it. Like, and I'm not religious myself. I also identify like I'm an atheist, but I grew up like I'm Mexican. I grew up in Mexico, so Catholic, right? Like grew up Catholic. It's part of our culture. And even reading some of the scenes in the goddamn with the beautiful art, beautiful gory art, right? It's I would feel like it's like my mom would be like, what are you reading? No, I'm put that down. Like no,
You're sick.
Blasphemous stuff, and I was wondering, like, because you're from, the Bible Belt, and then growing up with that, like, it's awesome to see you, like, because it makes for such a compelling story that I honestly, want it to be a series. Like, I would love this to be like an HBO Max greedy kind of series. Like, it'd be dope.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be cool with that. Yeah, I should add that I haven't had to write like my parents are dead in the sense that my mom is offended by any of this stuff, because my mom is most definitely my biggest fan in the world, and that she goes to the comic book store, and she's definitely the only great grandmother in Alabama who's read every issue of The Goddamned and Southern Bastards.
Oh wow.
But yeah, she reads and loves and supports anything I do, and it's kind of the reason I think I'm here in the first place, is that my mom drove me to the drugstore and bought me comics off the spinner rack, and she took me to the first comic book store I ever went to, and first comic book convention to Dragon Con in Atlanta. She drove me there multiple years, so she'd buy me whatever weird book or take me to see whatever weird movie I wanted to see. And so, yeah, I think she believed when I would start saying, I want to write comic books someday, I think she probably believed that I could do that more than even I did. Cause I'd said I wanted to do that, but again, I had no clue how to go about doing so. But I think, she always supported me and always felt like, yeah, if you want to do that someday, you'll figure it out. And, it took me a while, but ultimately she was right.
And now, is that your own personal spinner rack I see behind you?
It is. Yeah, that's the, it's not a vintage one. It's one of there was a Kickstarter a few years ago that Jim DeMonakis did for the spinner racks. They're really, really nice though. They're made to look like the vintage ones. So
yeah. You made it in life when you have your own personal spinner rack.
Oh, I got 2 spinner racks.
Yeah. My apologies, sir.
We're a 2 spinner rack household here. So I got
goals.
This one is covered with books that I wrote. This is like my office basically. Like I'm sitting at my desk, so this is where I work every day. But in my bedroom, I got an old vintage spinner rack that's covered with books that I bought off the spinner rack when I was a kid. So, those
awesome.
Teen Titans issues and
yes,
Jose Luis Garcia Lopez or Atari Force.
Holla.
Yes.
Blue Beetle, Blue Devil, a lot of DC stuff.
That
Which begs the
this.
question.
Yes.
When will you do some DC? Or can you even speak about this without getting like assassinated by like a Marvel assassin?
Yeah. You just see like a red dot trail across your forehead and just take you out.
Before you answer, I think it's important for you to know, because like from within our group, like I'm the Marvel guy and Rod is the heavy DC guy, and Ches
Gotcha.
is more DC, I guess, but in the middle now, I guess.
I'm
I
a
don't know.
centrist, like more, like as everybody should be, but
Right. Someday, I mean, I can't say exactly when. I most definitely grew up a big DC guy. Kind of, again, I lived in a small town, went to a small school. So in my grade school, there was like me and one other dude who were the big comic nerds. And he was a Marvel guy. He was a big X-Men, Spider-Man guy. So he and I used to get into heated arguments where I'm telling him, the Teen Titans were absolutely way, way better than the X-Men.
and you're right.
Um,
You're absolutely right.
You heard it here first. We're gonna post this out there. It's like what?
So yeah, I mean, again, some of those books were the books that got me into being such a big comic book fan. So, but I think when I first kind of broke in, I did what a lot of people do when they're trying to break into writing comics, is you kind of chase whatever seems available, right? Like if you have any connection with this editor, doesn't really matter what books they edit. Like, okay, well, I'm pitching this, right? Because this person gave me the time of day, and they edit Nightwing. So all right, here's my best Nightwing pitch. And a lot of people do that, and I did that for years and kind of wrote a lot of pitches that went nowhere, and pretty quickly realized, like, this is not the way I want to go about this, right? Like, I'm not just going to chase whatever is available or chase, specific characters. That I kind of transitioned into, like, okay, like, let me try to connect with editors I think I'll have common sensibilities with. And then it's like what's available, then I'll sort of figure that out, as opposed to just chasing stuff. So that's kind of always the way I've done my career, is that, I wasn't a huge Thor fan really before I had the opportunity to do Thor. And so it's never been about, like, well, I love the Teen Titans, I really just want to write the Teen Titans, or man, I got this briefcase full of Spider-Man ideas, I just want to write Spider-Man. It's kind of about what feels right at that moment in life. So if someday I wouldn't be surprised if that moment finds me doing DC stuff, but I'm still exclusive to Marvel for now. Have been since I think 2008, I think, was when I signed my first.
Wow.
Wowzers.
I think it was around that same time I wrote the only comic I've ever written for the DCU, which was a Joker's Asylum Penguin one shot, where Batman pops up in one panel. So that's the one panel I've written Batman.
I think, but I will take advantage of that, like, right, to talk about your current work on Marvel with the Avengers run. And I think you've had at least a sort of chance to write, for the Marvel Justice League with Squadron Supreme, and recently you just had this awesome Heroes Reborn run, which one of the things that I love the most about the Heroes Reborn run was that you had each issue, right, was focused on each member of the Squadron Supreme. So like it gave you a chance to really write Nighthawk, which is, like sort of Batman-ish, right, a character. So how was that for you? And if you had to put, Squadron Supreme versus the Justice League, who would win and why?
Well,
No pressure.
in terms of first part of your question, yeah, I mean, that, I think sort of goes back to what we were talking about initially, of just coming out of the worst part of the shutdown and the pandemic, and all of us sort of holed up in our homes. The comic industry shutting down for a period of time. Like, coming out of that, when I first kind of was getting back to work, Heroes Reborn was the first thing that I wrote. And I think that was, very much about me sort of grappling with difficult times and dark times, for the world, for me personally, and just wanting a return to joy in a lot of different ways, right? And so the Heroes Reborn was kind of something, an idea I had for a long time that I knew I was building towards, but I think the way it sort of fit with that moment in time made it kind of even more special to me. And then I think you can see again, a thread back to that, to me being that kid buying books off the spinner rack, in the drugstore.
Yeah.
And what sparked in me about the characters and the bigger world and everything that helped make me a comic book fan for almost 40 years at this point, and all that flowing into me being someone who loved to write and wanted to write comics. I tried to pour all of that into Heroes Reborn and do something that was a celebration of these characters in a very specific kind of world, to do it as what was meant to look like basically a line of books, right, from this other version of the Marvel Universe. So that's why each issue focuses on a different character with a different artist. It's meant to be like, this is Hyperion issue 897, right? That's been that reflects his adventures in this world where he has always been, Marvel's mightiest hero. So I poured all that into it. I hopefully, that joy comes across, that I had a blast writing that and creating that world. I think there's still I think you can also see there's kind of a dark undercurrent, and that these are not necessarily like joyful, happy versions of those characters, that there's a darkness to a lot of them.
Oh yeah.
So but I think it was really in some sense, the timing, of it all again made it a hopefully a more powerful, more meaningful story, while also just being a lot of fun. Getting to see James Stokoe draw Dr. Spectrum fighting the Rocket Raccoon was definitely a career highlight for me.
No, honestly, yeah, each of those issues were impressive. Like, I love exactly what you're saying about like each artist was like in pretending that where it's like issue 300 or whatever, because I can't even think about the world building that kind of went into it, because I like each issue, like I walked into like there's mad history here. I need to know more, right? Like, and it was so much fun. And as you're saying, with the dark tone and the good, obviously it's a great story. Like in things like Power Princess having a hammer, an axe based off of the Rainbow Bridge. Like I want that story, right? Like I want to revisit this world.
Well, all I can say is that we will see those characters again, the Squadron Supreme characters. And even as I was doing Heroes Reborn, kind of even before, as we were leading into it, I always knew that was kind of an appetizer before what was to come. So if you like sort of the nature of what Heroes Reborn was, then Avengers Forever is sort of the main event for that. And that with that, it will very much be about trying to do that same sort of thing in different ways with each issue, with each arc. That same sort of idea over and over and over and over again in different versions.
That's gonna be awesome.
In the biggest, craziest way possible. With all that also building in conjunction with the other Avengers book, the two of them kind of interlocking in some way and building towards the story that is to come, probably this time next year, somewhere late next year.
Right, because I believe like it all starts, I think, in December with Avengers Forever, bro. You have your big Avengers 50 coming out November, right? Yes. Kind of, does it all kind of connect there?
Congratulations,
right?
by the way.
Yes.
Thanks. Yeah, it's Avengers 50/750. It comes out in November. It's giant. It's like 70, 80, 90 pages, something like that. It's huge. It's
Good
like
lord.
the size of a miniseries, in one issue. It's definitely the biggest single comic I've ever written.
Yes.
Does that even fit in a bag? Like, does that even fit in like the cellophane bag?
You have to buy one. You have to buy a magazine bag, I think. To put it.
That's ambitious. Can't wait for that.
It's big, yeah. So it's, a lot of the stuff I've kind of been playing with in Avengers. So it comes to a head in that, and if you picked up the Avengers Free Comic Book Day issue, that gave you a little tease of kind of these new bad guys that I'm bringing into the book, and so they show up in Avengers 50. There's a lot of craziness going on, and it's a lot of different super cool artists working on it, including Javier Garron, who's been drawing Avengers, and Ed McGuinness, who's been working on the book since the beginning, and Aaron Cooter, who'll be doing Avengers Forever. So yeah, that's a big, huge ball of craziness that sets the stage for Avengers Forever and for what's to come in Avengers.
Right. And Avengers Forever, is that going to be another ongoing book, or is it a mini? That's the part I wasn't, and it's going to be running same with Avengers, because something I saw recently in the news, I think for Newsrama, was that apparently it's going to be Robbie Reyes Ghostwriter kind of leading the Avengers Forever.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Robbie's a big part of it. And again, we sort of see how that something happens to Robbie in Avengers 50, and that sort of leads into Avengers Forever. Yeah, they're both ongoing books. It's basically, with Avengers, we'd been doing 18, 19 issues a year most years. With this, they'll both be monthly, so I'll just be doing 24. So it's just adding not that many more issues, even though we're doing 2 books. And again, they'll be separate, but also interlocking in some ways, and with very, very different sort of mission statements. But as especially as things go along over the course of the next year, we'll start to see those 2 books come crashing together. And I've kind of said a couple of times, I think, I'm looking at this as something, the story overall, and in particular Avengers Forever, that's not just reflecting threads and ideas I've been playing with for the last few years in Avengers, but you will see threads that go back to my Thor run in a very significant way.
Holy crap.
You will see threads that go back to kind of the sort of the main touchstones of my career at Marvel this last about 16 years, including Ghost Rider was the first ongoing book I had. I worked on Wolverine for like 6 years. So not just Avengers, not just Thor, but you will see a lot of the stuff I've done, threads that lead into these Avengers stories in some pretty huge and maybe unexpected ways.
Yes.
So
To make these big stories, do you go back to your old scripts, or are they just floating around in your head and you're just tying them together?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I have to. I mean, I forget things I've written, right? Like I have to pull out my
Yeah,
script
it's a lot.
sometimes. Like
It's so much.
I mean, I had to do that today. I was
So
writing
much.
something today, and I was like, "Where was that?" Like, I forget things about a character that I created. Like, where was that person from? What was their deal?
Well, and actually with the throwback, stuff, like I'm actually starting to pick up a little bit. Like I want to know, like building off of Rod's question, like how intentional from the get-go was this? Like, because you brought in the Phoenix back in Avengers in a very big way, but we also saw the Phoenix in the Thor run, right? Where Jane Foster epically shows down with the Phoenix, and she knows that there's some kind of connection there with Thor, and we end up having a big reveal with the Avengers that the Phoenix is Thor's mom. And so like that's awesome. Like how was that from the get-go? You knew you wanted to get to that point? Or
well, all I can say is I think you can look back at something like that, like when you're talking about the Phoenix stuff. Yes, I think you can look back to again, years ago, stuff I did in Thor, right? Like
Yeah.
exactly that of Jane Foster, you know, asking Thor, like, what's the deal with you and the Phoenix? Like, did you guys used to go out? Like, she could tell like there's some
Right.
kind of there's some emotion here I don't understand, right? And it'd been established in multiple places that you know, not just that there was this prehistoric version of the Phoenix, but there was a love affair there between that character and Odin. So some of this is like, you know, you can see building blocks that have been there for, you know, 5-6 years, right? Like over the course of multiple different books. And yeah, some of that just in general, you know, I've enjoyed doing that of building toward stuff over the course of a long period of time. And especially by the time I started doing Thor, like feeling like I had the confidence and sort of my place there that I could do that I wasn't going to get fired tomorrow, that I could lay tracks that would take me a while to pay off, right? And so, you know, I don't want to make it seem like I am some master tactician where it's all sketched out on the walls. Like sometimes it is in some
It
sense.
seems like it. That's exactly what it seems
good.
like.
Well, then I'll just stop there. But other times things, you know, you just have to leave room to like figure some shit out as you go, right? And sometimes things work out in ways or occur to you as you're going and you're like, oh man, it's going to seem like I had this in mind the whole time when I did not, but it definitely works out that way. So it's a mix of both. Yeah, a lot of the stuff I was already thinking with Thor led into Avengers, you know, once I got that gig, because they overlapped a little bit. I was still working on Thor when I started Avengers. And now I'm just kind of pulling in even more stuff.
So in a way, it's kind of like your own story god bomb. Because you're bringing everything from the past all the way to the future in the present. It's like your own story bomb, which is an amazing concept. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, you know, clearly I've got it. If you go back to that God Butcher story, clearly I've got a thing for doing stories that play out in different eras, right? Like, and
oh yeah, definitely.
That first big Thor story, I wanted to do young Thor and old King Thor in the far future, and then leading right into Avengers, you know, I introduced these prehistoric versions. Like I liked the idea of reaching back to, again, you know, caveman stories. I like caveman stories. So clearly that's a thing I like to play with. And I, you know, plug another one of my books. I think that goes back to my love of Conan and how I first discovered those Robert E. Howard Conan stories. And you know, I think chronologically the first, well, in terms of publishing, the very first Howard Conan story anybody read was Phoenix on the Sword, which was a King Conan story. So you first introduce this guy and he's the king of Aquilonia, and then later you go back and, oh, he was this barbarian who stumbled out of, you know, Samaria in the north and was a thief and a pirate and all this. But when you read those stories, like, you know, they weren't told in chronological order, right? Like they jumped around to sort of all different parts of his life. So that I think was what pulled me into the character of just, again, getting the scope of this epic life that he was living. And I was absolutely thinking of that when I did that first God of Thunder story, by pulling together those different versions of Thor, to the point when then I, you know, years later when I got the chance to write a Conan story, I was like, well, shit, what do I do now? Because I kind of
you blew it.
that was sort of. I mean, I don't know that I would have done a story that brought, like, you know, young Conan and
future Conan
and future Conan together.
That would work. That would be great. Exactly.
I don't think anybody would complain. It would be cool.
Exactly.
But I did, you know, for that Conan the Barbarian story, I did do a story that sort of touched on all the different, or a lot of the different parts of Conan's life. I wanted to do something that was not just 3 periods, but it was basically every issue of that 12-issue story. We were jumping around to a different part of his life while telling an overarching story that sort of tied all those together. So if anything, I knew I had to do something that seemed bigger in some sense than the God of Thunder story.
So
And
so
it must
how
give you the
often? All right. No, so how often does it begin with the story versus the character? So with Thor, you kind of had an idea for a story, and then you could have, if you would have done Conan, you could have maybe put him in that place. So how often do you begin with just a good story and then you work a character into it versus the other way around?
Well, I mean, it depends. I definitely think I'm more in as a writer and as a reader and everything. I'm more into character than I am plot. I don't. I think probably my strongest writing stuff is more character stuff than just big plot-driven stories. So I mean, there have been times like when I did Wolverine Goes to Hell. That was kind of an idea I had for a John Constantine Hellblazer story.
Oh, cool.
Because I did a couple issues of Hellblazer kind of right before I signed a Marvel exclusive, and I was going to do more, but then wasn't able to. So I'd had this idea of like, well, John Constantine gets sent to hell by one of his enemies. At least his spirit is sent to hell, but his body is still on Earth. And there's like this demon running around in John Constantine's body, like, ruining what reputation he has left. So I never got to do that as Hellblazer, but I kind of turned that into a Wolverine story. So that's one case of me, reusing a story for a different character, but generally it's not like that. And I think really with Thor, that very much started as like, who is this character? I think everything for me started with that because I said I wanted to do Thor and kind of got that gig before I had a story. I didn't have any idea what my story would be. And again,
Wow.
wasn't the world's biggest, I hadn't read that much Thor stuff. So then
Yeah.
I sat down and started, from the beginning. I'd never read any of those,
Wow.
the original Kirby Thor stuff. I'd read a lot of other Kirby stuff, but for whatever reason, that was a blank spot for me. So I think figuring out what do I think is cool about Thor, and then how do I relate to that or bring something of myself to that. And again, for me as an atheist, it became about doing the unatheist thing of leaning into the idea of Thor as a god. Because there's a period in time where the movies were starting to kind of lean away from that, right? Like, whereas he's not really a god, he's just, this otherworldly figure that people here have perceived as gods. But
Right.
so I didn't want to do that. I very much wanted to, like, no, he's a god. That's what's different about him. So I looked at it as, okay, well, what's cool about that? What's interesting to me about that? And for me as an atheist, I could look at Thor as, okay, he's the kind of God I would like to believe in, right? Like, on the one hand, you could look at that God bomb story as this really, like I said, a darkly pessimistic story about, man, all gods are really terrible and we'd all be better off without them. But in the midst of that, it's really the story of Thor, of being the one God who's like, no, this guy's awesome, right?
God of gods.
Right. And it comes back to that idea of worthiness, of him. I'd love that idea of him waking up every day and looking at that hammer next to his bed, and he doesn't know, and until he picks it up, he doesn't know if he'll be able to, right? Because there's always that doubt of like that question of, well, like, I know I was worthy yesterday, but I said it there before I went to bed. But does that mean I'm going to be worthy today? So I think it's that question that makes him the hero that he is. It makes him the God that he is. So I very much started with that idea before I knew I wanted to do, okay, I want to do old Thor and a serial killer of gods and all that sort of stuff. It very much began with who is this guy, and why should I give a shit? Because first I have to give a shit before I can expect anyone who's reading it to give a shit, and can't just expect like, well, Thor's been around a long time. Clearly people have read a lot of Thor stories. Everybody knows who he is and what his deal is. Like, think you can't ever go into any story like that. It's gotta be in the page, right? It's gotta like show me why I should care about
Yeah.
this character, what makes them interesting or exciting. Don't assume I come to the party with that knowledge.
And I love the way you phrase that, because I can totally understand why you would say that Thor is the kind of God you would want to believe, because due to the hammer, he has a built-in sense of humility, which almost no God has. He has to continually keep on proving himself that he's worthy of the mantle of a God, as where every single other deity is like, they have carte blanche with their like powers, like do whatever you want. But him is like, no, you can't do whatever you want, because you have to maintain, it's essentially the thing that makes you you. Because like it's
Right.
on the hammer, like whoever's worthy, they're Thor. Thor is Thor because, you know, he's Thor Odin's son. But just like there's been other people who have picked up the hammer, like Jane Foster, he knows he can lose the mantle. Not many other gods have to worry about that. And also, I want to give you the utmost props, which is a term from New York, because you make a lot of complex lore very easily digestible. The amount of lore that you laid out so ambitiously in volume 1 with Omnipotent City and the God community, and that they all know each other, and the Hall of the All-Knowing. As I was reading all that, and it's funny that you said that you read a whole bunch of Kirby, because I was like, this is very Kirby-esque. So it's like you still managed to keep the same tone, but you managed to fit an overwhelming amount of lore in a very accessible manner, which is incredible. I just have to say.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, certainly there was a lot of Kirby on my mind, and I very much looked at that, especially that first big arc, as like a dark Kirby story, right? And I think
Yeah.
I knew when I started writing that book that Esad Ribic was going to draw it, which I think also helped, where I could, know in my head, like, oh, Esad's going to, Omnipotent City, like he's going to draw the hell out of that. Like I knew, I knew with Esad I could kind of shoot for the stars, because he's so amazing. But thanks. Yeah, I mean, I to me, that's the challenge of this job, right? And the job in terms of doing, work for hire superhero stuff, is that these are characters that have been around for so long, longer than I've been alive and any of us, and they'll all be around after we're all gone, right? So you have all these amazing stories that people know and love, and all these cool toys that these amazing creators have left in the toy box for you to play with, and you kind of get to stand on the shoulders of all those giants, but you also can't just rely on that. And think of Marvel retreats, we talk a lot about trying to be wary of when we're just picking the bones of stories from the past, and are we doing
Right.
a story that's just about another story from that someone else did, or are we taking that stuff and building upon it and trying to do something new? So I think that's always the challenge. And it is a challenge, but it's one that I do have fun with.
And
it's
actually building off of that, like from how you were choosing, was great to hear how you choose like the story to go to the character, and building off of that, and with deities and all that. Like you made a very big one, deity kind of related to recently in the Avengers, that you gave Echo becoming the Phoenix. That's huge. Like that's huge, right? Because it's the Phoenix is a classic X-Men, being, and it's mostly Jean Grey or redheaded people. And it's like, how did that happen? How did you end up choosing? Like, how did that, like, were you preparing Echo for that from before you knew this, or?
Well, from when I introduced those prehistoric Avengers, like we had seen that the Phoenix was one of those, right? So I'd kind of established the Phoenix as one of these sort of core iconic legacy characters of the Marvel universe, right? Like going back to the very beginning. Doesn't mean the Phoenix has been there that whole time, between 1 million BC and today, but that that character was there in the beginning alongside these other, big iconic characters, and that there's a legacy to that. So once I established that, I knew at some point I wanted to bring a modern day version of the Phoenix into the Avengers, in a way that would, on the one hand, kind of separate that character from just the same old, another version of the same old X-Men story we'd seen. I wasn't interested in doing another Jean Grey story. I'd been a part of Avengers versus X-Men, where we played with a lot of Phoenix stuff and did, the story of Hope was a big part of the X-Men back then. So I didn't want to do that. But as the guy who used to be a big X-Men guy, a big part of the X-Men corner of the Marvel universe for years. Now I'm the Avengers guy, so I also like the idea of just kind of stealing this toy away from the X-Men.
Nice.
And again, what that could mean for the X-Men and the Avengers also. So I knew I wanted to bring in a modern day version of the Phoenix, and I didn't know right away it'd be Echo. I kind of had a list, and even one of the retreats sort of threw it out there as who would be cool, and there were different names on the list. But to me, the main thing was I wanted somebody who would just use that power in a different way, right? I didn't want to just see the same thing we'd seen before, where this is a character who flies around with the Phoenix raptor, fiery raptor around them, has some sort of telepathic or telekinetic abilities and sort of fires fiery blasts of energy.
Yeah.
I wanted to see like what, really the whole Enter the Phoenix, fight was about seeing like, well, what does it look like if Shang-Chi uses that power? And when Black Panther and Captain America use it, like those characters would use it in different ways than Jean Grey did. So kind of that all sort of led to Echo as being the one who seemed like the right fit for a lot of different reasons. And again, the way that sort of flowed together with the stuff I'm playing with the Phoenix and Thor. And again, there's sort of more of that to come. Still more of that story to be told.
Can't wait.
You'll see not as much in issue 50, but it's certainly issue 51. Like issue 50 again of Avengers is sort of the end of the World War She-Hulk arc. You have all this craziness that erupts, and it's the beginning of the arc that comes after. And so issue 51, the Phoenix and Thor will be a big part of.
Yes.
And
Cannot
by the way,
wait.
I just want to say that in that Into the Phoenix event, I stated this in a previous episode. The way that Hyperion went down was my favorite defeat. Because it was so philosophical.
Thanks. It kind of fits with the version of that character I'd already established and that we saw in Heroes Reborn, where just that idea that his mind would be expanded to such an extent just seems horribly, horribly un-American to him. He couldn't do it.
Like as I was reading it, I'm like, am I understanding? It's like, this is brilliant. Like I was ear to ear as I was reading that, because it was so clever. It was so clever the way he was defeated. That was masterful.
Thanks. Well, it also is Shang-Chi winning a fight by just sitting there, right? Like sitting there meditating. He didn't even lift a finger, and he won that round.
Yeah,
Which if the movie would have been that way.
On the topic of Hyperion, we noticed that you never answered who would win in a slugfest between the Squadron Supreme and the Justice League.
Like that was on purpose.
I don't know. I think that'd be a pretty good fight. I tried to make the Squadron Supreme as incredibly powerful as I possibly could.
Yeah.
We'd see Hyperion kill Galactus and kill the Hulk. Show that Dr. Spectrum is, taken Thanos off the board and killed a Celestial, and that Power Princess, defeated Gore the God Butcher, and so I mean they are of their version of the Marvel universe. They are far and away the most powerful characters in it, right? Like they have defeated everyone put against them. So I think they would be able to hold their own against Superman and Batman and whoever else.
Okay, we want to get your
That was
take
so
on a few
condescending.
more. We have a quick fire segment. We want to see which of two options you think is more epic, or who would come out on top if it was
Okay.
a battle royale of some sort. We're gonna start with Trump and Biden. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Okay.
We're gonna start with the cinematic versions of Harley Quinn and the Black Widow.
Oh, like the movie versions, who would?
Yeah.
Well, Black
would
Widow's
come out?
dead, so that's not going to be much of a fight.
Okay.
That's just Harley Quinn kicking a corpse.
All right. We'll take it. We'll take it. Coke or
All
Pepsi?
right.
Coke or Pepsi? Oh, that's not it. Is that even a question?
Well,
Coke.
let's.
It's Coke, isn't it?
Like I was just I went to Herman, Missouri that's like the extent of my world travels the last year and a half as I went to Herman, Missouri, which is sort of like, Missouri's version of Napa. It's like this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere that was settled by Germans back in the day. So you have a lot of German restaurants, like really cool old preserved houses, and a lot of wineries. This is a long story to answer your question, but I'm going.
No
Go ahead.
worries. No worries. No
Go.
worries.
So I had a couple of lovely days in Herman, Missouri, drinking wine and eating sausages. But the worst part for me was like I couldn't get a fucking Coke. Like every place we went was a Pepsi place.
It's the
And I'm like,
worst.
what is it with the Pepsi in here? Because if I ask for a Diet Coke and they'll say like, well, Diet Pepsi, like ask you like, is
Like
that
what?
okay? Like would Diet Pepsi be okay? I'm
It's like
no,
the
that's not
Pepsi
okay.
company
Right,
situated
well,
there. Like,
My go-to is always like, how about Diet Dr. Pepper? Because I like Diet Dr. Pepper. No Diet Dr. Pepper. So I'm just like, give me a water. I'm good with water. Pepsi's gross.
all right, all right, all right.
I'd say as I'm wearing a CM Punk shirt. Are you guys wrestling guys?
Used to be.
Well,
I know he had a
And-
brief UFC stint.
And I know he just came back in AEW.
Just came back
correct?
in AEW.
Yeah,
Punk's,
he just came back.
Punk's like got a big Pepsi tattoo. I don't know what the genesis of that. I'll have to ask him. But
Maybe he just
So-
really likes Pepsi.
so apologies to Punk as I'm wearing his shirt and dissing Pepsi. But yeah, I really, really hate Pepsi.
All right, all right. Metallica versus Megadeth.
I was never that into Megadeth, so I'm Metallica.
Okay. Joss Whedon's Avengers
did I lose you
versus
guys?
Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Oh wait, I lost you for a second. Say that one again.
All right. Joss Whedon's Avengers versus Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Oh, you guys are just trying to get me in trouble.
And these are segments that we've done. We always do this who's more epic, and we battle amongst ourselves between who's so we want to get your thoughts on that's who's more epic between these two.
I'm watching your back for any red dots in your window.
I saw both of those versions of that movie. I did. I watched them both. Jesus, I'm not the biggest Zack Snyder DCU fan. I can't say that I am. I did not like Man of Steel.
Oh,
You just hurt Rod's soul.
I could appreciate some of the stuff that was in his cut of Justice League, of more cyborg stuff, and it certainly made a little more sense, like in that version. But yeah, I can't say I feel a great affinity for those movies, which makes me sad because again, those are the characters that some of the characters that made me such a big comic book fan back in the day. And man, as a kid growing up, like for the longest time, like the Incredible Hulk TV show was the best comic book adaptation that we had, right? Like live action adaptation. And so anything that came out, I was there, right? Like I saw, those terrible Captain America movies.
That escalated very quickly.
I saw Return of the Swamp Thing in the theater.
Whoa!
Like opening night. Wow. It was sparsely attended, but I was there. So I mean, anything comic book related, no matter how terrible I knew it was going to be, I was there. I felt like it was my duty to go and support it, right? Like hoping for the day when we'll get better versions.
One day.
We did. I saw the first Tim Burton Batman movie. I saw like twice that week. It came out. So if I could go back then and tell that guy who was standing in line for Batman, like someday there's a Batman versus Superman movie that's going to come out and you won't even go see it in the theater, I would have been like, get the hell out of here. You're crazy. Like that's
you lie, sir. You
like,
lie.
I'm the guy who went to see Return of the Swamp Thing in the theater. How am I not going to go see Batman and Superman? But I did not. I did not see it in the theater.
Wait, so to put it,
you eventually saw it.
I have seen most of it.
Oh, so to put it in perspective, what you're saying is that Return of the Swamp Thing is better than Batman versus Superman.
I don't know if I would say that. I will say I saw one in the theater and the other I did not. But I can't. I think I am equally uninterested in revisiting either one at this point. I will say that.
I can hear Rod's soul cracking.
Yo, Rod loves Snyder and all things DCEU. But he'll cry when we're done filming. Don't worry.
Well, hey,
I'm sure there's a Marvel rep off camera somewhere over there telling you what to say. Like, no,
cue
we
cards.
don't like anything DC.
Say this.
I will say, so I'm not just trying to crap on Zack Snyder. Like what was the name of the zombie movie he just did on Netflix with Batista?
Army of the Dead.
Army of the Dead. I liked that. That was fun.
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
And I thought it was weird how thoroughly uninterested Batista's character was in like all the other guys he brought with him who were like dying one by one. He
had way more character. Yeah,
just like not even looking back, just like full speed ahead. But yeah, I thought it was really, really fun.
And on the topic of movies, and before we wrap up, because we don't want to take too much of your time, though, but you have, we're talking about movies, and we've talked about your amazing Thor run. We have to ask, like, how does it feel that awesome elements of your Thor run are going to be made for the movies? We're going to see Gore, the God Butcher, played by Christian Bale, which like how does that? Natalie Portman, Jane Foster, Thor. Like, how's that for you as a creator? And then are you involved to some degree, or can you tell us that?
I mean, it's super exciting. I'm excited to see what they do. Excited to see Taika's version of that story. I always take the same attitude, I think, with anything of mine that's being adapted in whatever sense. Like, I just want to see that person, that creator, do something cool with it, do their version of it. I'm a huge fan of Taika Waititi. Doesn't need to be exactly what I wrote. Like the book's not going anywhere, like anybody will be able to go back and, like, I did my version of it. There it is. So I'm super excited to see his version, to see Christian Bale's version of Gore. Yeah, that's really super cool. No, I'm not involved. I mean, the Kevin Feige is pretty much my boss in some sense these days, and he's more overseeing the comic part of things. But still, I know a little bit more than anybody else about what they're doing, but I'm like the wires don't really, cross that way in terms of I would be great if we get to the point where there is more interaction and the, I think it's really cool to see how much stuff the studios pulls from the comics, right? Like
Yeah.
watching any of those Marvel TV shows, like we're not just talking, stuff from years and years ago and the biggest, most iconic stories that everybody know. Like they're mining all kinds of stuff, like up until recent times. So I think that's cool. That's exciting to see. They're paying attention, right? And they're looking for cool stuff kind of wherever they can find it. I think that's great. And if that someday turns into, those of us working on the publishing side being more involved in that stuff, I think that would be really great.
That's wild. Just that spectrum just of occurrences over time, from you submitting a story to winning, to having a character that you created being in a movie played by Christian Bale. You made it. And we thank you for it. That is like, just in that context, that's insane. That's insane. Congratulations on everything.
Well,
and
thanks. I mean, to me, like, I feel like I've made it literally every day the last 16 years. I've gotten to get up and go. Like, I don't just say that because that's what you're supposed to say. Like, I've honestly felt like that. Again, like the joy I get from doing this job in the first place is very much feels like if that was all I got, that would be enough. I mean, it's great that I get money to pay my light bill and that I, that's been able to provide me a living. That's awesome. All the other stuff does feel like, like gravy. Because you never know when you're writing a story. I think all you know is like, I'm invested in this. I think this is cool. You don't know how the story's, gonna turn out when it gets to the page. You don't know what people are gonna think about it. People are gonna love it. People are gonna hate it. Probably both. And then anything that happens beyond that, you have no idea. I don't think anybody ever writes a story, or I certainly know I don't. I don't write it thinking like, I can't know what anybody else is going to think about it. I can't guess what any of you guys are going to like it or hate it, or if it's going to become a movie, or if it's going to, disappear into quarter bin boxes, at the local comic convention. You have no idea. But I think that doing that story in the first place kind of has to be that's the part I can control, right? It's my part of it. And as long as I feel good about that part, then I'm good, whether anything happens with it again or not. But yeah, I'll be there to see the movie alongside everybody else, and I'll be excited.
We cannot wait. We're insanely excited.
Exactly. And we really hope that you get the credit's due for these creations, although Taika does his own story and reinvents it. I do think, you've done wonderful work. And I do think everybody out there needs to go, as you said, like they'll see Taika's story of it, but then gotta go back to the books and see how it was done originally. I think that'd be dope. And just to wrap up, we want to know actually now with, the pandemic getting a little bit better, kind of how we started talking about at the beginning, are we going to see you at New York City Comic Con?
No, not this year. I mean, I've kind of, stuck to the thing this year where I said I wasn't doing any shows at all this year. So I didn't even go to Planet Comic Con, which is the con here in Kansas City I'm at every year.
Oh,
so still sort of laying off this year. I mean, I haven't been to Disney World. Last year was the first year in like 6 or 7 years I haven't been to Disney World. So if I'm not going to Disney World, I'm probably, again, the only place I've been is Herman, Missouri.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which is lovely. You should go.
But they have no Coke.
Bet.
Yeah, don't go expecting a Coke.
Go for the wine, and that's it.
Bring your own Coke.
I just want to take one minute because I've been fairly reserved up until now, but there's a fanboy that's just screaming. So I got to say a few things. First of all, Wolverine and the X-Men is my all-time favorite X-Men book. I
Cool,
thought it
thank
was. I thought it could have been. It could still be adapted into an animated series, like, and just reach a whole new audience. The stories were just that good, and the art, of course, was spectacular. And secondly, one of my all-time favorite binge-worthy books was Punisher Max by the great Garth Ennis. And when he, left the book, I was there sobbing. And then you came on and you wrote 3 magnificent volumes introducing staple Punisher characters, and you just blew it away. So anybody listening, please check out all of these books and everything else we've spoken about on this podcast. And also thank you so much for taking the time out and having this discussion with us.
Well, thanks. I appreciate all that, especially after I crapped on your Zack Snyder movies.
So him saying what he just said right now, the whole time he was quiet, he was parsing what you said about the Snyder work.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really proud of both of those two very different books, right?
Yeah.
My Punisher and my Wolverine the X-Men, but equally proud of both, especially Punisher, getting to work with the late great Steve Dillon he drew every issue of that. So yeah, both of those are special.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. Aaron. So for all the fans out there, open up your favorite comic book app, whether it's Marvel or Comixology, type in Jason Aaron's name and just hit purchase on everything. Just buy. Just buy everything he's ever written. And on that note, Mr. Jason Aaron, it was an honor. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. You kind of made our year of podcasting thus far. Thank you for being you. Highly appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys. You guys are great. I appreciate all the passion and everything, and for you guys to started doing this in the first place out of the pandemic, I think is cool. Like I said, it's good to look and celebrate the positive things that have come from the last year. So I'm glad you guys have started this, and that you're bring such passion and excitement and joy to what you're talking about. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I echo that. Like, I appreciate. Thank you, Brian, for taking the time to join with us. And we would keep talking to you hours on end, so
Indeed.
We would just, but obviously it's getting late, so we'll let you go. And we would love to have you back. We would love to then pick your brain once we see all the epicness you're going to do with Avengers Forever, the Multiversal Masters of Evil, all of this. And so hopefully we'll see you, because we're here in New York City. Hopefully we'll see you at next year's New York City Comic-Con.
Oh, that's sweet. Oh, that much sweeter.
Yeah, I miss New York City. It's one of the things I miss. So I look forward to coming back.
And it misses you.
Indeed. We can't wait to have you back.
It told you that?
Yeah.
Yeah. All the cokeheads said, we miss Jason Aaron. All right, everybody. So go check out his stuff. We love you all. Would you like to tell the fans where they can find you on any social media or?
Well, I'm on Instagram these days as Jason Aaron. I've got a free newsletter you can subscribe to on Substack that I send out, every couple weeks. Those are the main. I'm still on Twitter, but sort of hanging on by a thread. So I think Instagram and Substack are the best places to find me. And I've got my own website out there too, so I'm easy to Google.
Awesome. So go look him up, folks. And on that note, this is Chaz.
Yo, this is Miguel.
This is Rob. Peace.
Deuces.